Welcome to Two Lean Guys podcast. This is Uncle D, and as always, with me is Johnny Hustle. Johnny, how are you, buddy?
Fantastic, Uncle D. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's interesting because as we were preparing for this podcast, I was looking at the first four that we did.
Mm-hmm.
And we started last September. We were experimenting a little bit, becoming with analog creatures in a digital age, as it were. And now it seems like, current challenges have us needing to leap into that digital age faster than we ever expected. What do you think?
Yeah, it looks like we don't really have a choice, if you think about all of our lean journeys, they were all built around having to make change. And so if we're going to be a change agent, you might as well embrace change and learn to roll with it and then expand upon it. Make it a lever of a positive lever instead of a barrier.
Yeah, and if you don't mind today, I wanted to try to ask a few questions, topics that I know you and I have talked about over the years, but maybe not entirely in one conversation.
Sure.
I think it's important for people that listen to us understand a little bit more about where we learned these things, or I learned them from you, primarily, others as well.
Others, yeah, sure you have.
But you and I have been on a journey together for a long time. It hasn't, really subsided much. It waned a few times, but not really long times.
Well, so oddly enough that you're bringing that up is not last week, but the week prior, during the midst of the COVID-19, I found myself just saying, okay, there's things that I should be doing in this office that I haven't done in a long time. And one of them is just clearing a lot of clutter. And I have this file cabinet in the corner that virtually has in there a file folder for every single project that I've ever done. And quite a few of those were projects that you and I have done together. Mm-hmm. But even prior to meeting you, I had some file folders in there, and they went all the way back to when I met Mr. Anami, who was my sensei. Mm-hmm. And I found some photographs in there that brought me back to my original roots of learning the Toyota production systems. And I'll tell you what, it was really kind of fun to see that. Not only does it show me in a much younger form, but it also shows me and some other folks in our team, and also Mr. Anami and his team. As you know, the way that Toyota does their work is they never do this alone. It's not one sensei and he's teaching you everything.
Right.
In that group with him, he always had his second in command, the person he was grooming to take over his position, and they always had at least one other person, which was the person who was being groomed to take the second in command's position.
Right.
So total Hoshin planning from the get-go. And then they usually traveled with two or three other people, one of them being an interpreter, which I found out much later on they didn't need, which was kind of fun in its own right. So yeah, some of those photos just gave me a big reminder of how it is that they really differed from us in their Hoshin planning, and how they traveled and how they taught us what they had to do, for us to be better, and how that really led to the rest of my career.
Yeah, that's it's interesting when you look at those kinds of historical artifacts, the memories it brings back, right? So what are your early memories of engaging? Well, just help us understand a little bit. I understand where you're from, but help us understand a little bit about where you learned the Toyota production system and from who.
All right, so there's really, it's a two-branch tree. The first branch came from our, when I say ours, the company that I was working with at the time. We were invited to be a founding member of the Bluegrass Automotive Manufacturers Association, also known as BAMA. People have written volumes about what BAMA did and everything else, and it's a really amazing product. I'm a product of BAMA. Now, at the time, looking back, I look at that and say, that really was a badge. It was a fantastic thing that happened to me. But at that moment in time, it was not. It was a stain. We were invited because we were a terrible supplier.
Right.
And they liked our product and they wanted to buy our product.
Right.
But they were not convinced that we would be able to deliver.
Right.
So essentially it was two things that happened. One, we won the Camry business for all of North America. And there was a sister company, it wasn't our sister, it was a sister company to Toyota that had won the same business for all the Camrys that were being built in Japan. And our raw materials were better than theirs. However, they knew the Toyota production systems and we were an at-risk supplier.
Right.
So contractually, they forced us to do a technology transfer between the two companies. They would teach us the Toyota production systems, and then our scientists would go over to their facility and teach them how to make their raw materials better.
That's a great collaborative exchange.
It really was, but we didn't look at it that way at the time. Looking back now, we couldn't be happier. I couldn't be happier. But at the moment, it felt like total punishment.
It was out of necessity.
100% out of necessity. They really wanted our product, and we really wanted to give it to them, sell it to them, but they had no faith whatsoever that if they had a spike in demand, we would be able to handle it.
So it's kind of like in alignment with what Deming says, it takes a crisis sometimes to drive the change.
Right. And for us, it was contract. If we did not agree, we would not get the contract.
All right. So then what was your journey like with approaching this? Because you're an industrial engineer, that's your education.
Mm-hmm.
Fine product of Maine.
Yes, sir.
And you guys had you have a very hands-on approach, but it didn't, how did that all evolve?
So it was really kind of a strange journey in that I wasn't the manager who was, I owned the whole process, the pre-production process, everything from after we won the contract to it goes into production. That whole chunk of time was mine for every single product line that we had. And I had to be able to prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that we could run at rate and with the requisite quality, at the appropriate tack times, all of that. We didn't have a choice. The starting clock of when that first car was coming off the line was known in advance, and you didn't have a choice but to hit those dates.
Right.
So very early, it was almost the week after we won the business, and Mr. Anami comes walking into our facility. And with him, he has an interpreter. He has his whole Hoshin team. He's got this entourage around him. And, I'm designated the guy. Whenever Mr. Anami's in the building, I'm the guy that has to deal with everything Mr. Anami needs, wants, whatever. And
right.
So, of course, as we do, hey, Mr. Anami, we'll take a tour. And so I'm talking to the interpreter, and the interpreter's talking to Mr. Anami, and I'm telling other people in the plant, go do this, go do that, go set up this area, and I'm also making the mistake of telling them which areas we're going to avoid. I'm thinking the interpreter's talking to Mr. Anami, they're not paying attention, so we're going to skip this lab, or we're not going to go to that spot or whatever. And somehow, as we're going through our tour, Mr. Anami is always pointing at the spot I don't want to go to and saying, well, what's going on over there? Through the interpreter.
Right.
And so sure enough, I don't have a choice. I got to go show him.
Right.
And so by the time we were done, even the first tour, my kimono is wide open,
right.
And there is nothing good to see there.
Right.
We didn't really have a full understanding of tack time.
Right.
We kept thinking that was the same as cycle time.
Right.
And however fast our equipment could run, that was what we were focusing on. And we weren't looking at the entire system of, going from the needle punch part of the process, which was making our carpet, all the way through to making the final assembled trunk assembly. And
So when you realized, how did you realize that he spoke English?
it was months later. He masked it well. It just that he always seemed to have this way of knowing everything, and it started feeling like he was mystic. You know, he just had these mystical qualities about him that he always knew the right questions to ask. And some of those are now the questions that you and I ask anyway.
Right.
It was, you know, there's nothing magical about it at all. But at the time, it felt that way.
Right. Right. So what are the lessons that you carry forward primarily from those experiences? Because how long was the BAMA stuff?
So BAMA was kind of the consortium model that you and I work with an awful lot, where we would get together as a consortium of a lot of business companies that were all in trouble with Toyota, and we would meet and learn how to do practical Kaizen. And it was all about practical Kaizen.
Right.
And it wasn't necessarily about the tools. We use tools, but it was about learning how to think like somebody had to solve problems. You know, everything was a problem to solve. The tools were secondary. The tools we developed as we went to make those things happen. But it was always funny that, so one of the biggest lessons was that it always started with one thing in mind. And the first question was always, what's your tack time? Mm-hmm. You know, and now the tack time might not be just about today's demand. It was about, if you get your spike and you hit your spike in demand, what is that tack time for that spike? Right. Because you can always pare the process down from that spike. It's hard to build back up to that or beyond that spike.
Right. So is it fair to say adjust for pitch changes?
Yes, absolutely. It was adjusting for pitch changes. It was adjusting the amount of workers that you would have in the line or out of the line, depending upon how many, what your demand level was. And it was always changing. Today's tack could be different than last month's, you know?
Yeah. The backlog really drives the tack time, right? Mm-hmm. And just, you know, this isn't about tools, but tack time, of course, is the available work time divided by the number of units sold primarily.
Right. So it was all about meeting demand. And
so as the sales grow, mm-hmm. you know, your tact is a German word, right? It comes from meter or pace. And you can envision a metronome as you're slow, your tack time's slower, right? Your demand mm-hmm. is slower. The cycle times within this production's lead time all can go slower.
That's right.
And then the demand picks up, right? And then all of a sudden, everyone's got a new role. The cycle times change. The whip changes, mm-hmm. right? And everything is different.
Work content for their tasks change.
Correct.
You know, you end up with less work content per person,
right.
which means you need more people.
You know, it's funny because I struggle sometimes with the clients that get beyond 5S and Kaizen and the ones that are really trying to build a standard production system, and they understand the elements of the evaluation matrix, and they're trying to build that knowledge system, that right. whole production system. And it's so hard to just standardize at one general tack time.
Right.
Right. It's another level to be able to have standardization at multiple tack time rates so that people move to the work appropriately. Mm-hmm. And you adjust accordingly within the boundaries of, let's just call it cell flow. Is that fair?
That's perfectly fair. And it may be that what we would try to do is we would try to build a system where if the demand level was so low that only a single person was needed to run the line, and they just go from station to station to station to station to station to out and then start all over again, they could actually do it.
Yeah.
Now, the real trick was trying to convince a client that in order to do that properly, every station is already preloaded. They're not starting from, the very first bin and then going to the first workstation, the second workstation, the third workstation without filling all those workstations up to that point. And the reason is tomorrow's tack time might be different. And you want to be able to reassign people to the line so that now if it's only 2 people, somebody is doing the last 7 steps and someone else is doing the first 7 steps. And able to walk to the line and work, not walk to the line and then wait until the first piece goes through the first 7 locations.
Okay, so and let me try to reiterate what I think I thought I heard you say in just a different way.
Sure.
What it sounded to me like was when you guys go about building a production system, you're moving people to the work. Did I get that right?
Yeah, we're building cells that can be manned by several people or can be manned by a single person.
Okay. And so as the tack time changes, the demand rate changes, you guys are able to move people to adjust for that accordingly.
Right.
And then with regards to trying to integrate your lead time, your whole lead time is going to be from order entry to ship. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So you're going to have adjustments throughout. How did you manage that?
So how you do that is if you have a good idea of what your peak demand is going to be, and you break all of your workstations into small enough chunks of time so that it matches or is less than that tack time. So any one workstation, the cycle time has to be your peak demand tack time or less. Exactly the graph I would have been drawing. And so, exactly. And what you would do is if your tack time line ends up being much higher, then all you do is you just stack more of those little boxes on top of each other to get to yourself a higher tack time. Yeah, exactly, right? And so then what happens is, let's say your demand is such that it never hits peak. You just work the combination of piece parts that you have on all those individual workstations. You just work the right combinations so that no one combination adds up to more than the current tack time.
So how did you get the breakthrough in understanding this? Because you said that in the beginning you didn't know about cycle time and tack time, lead time, production time, supply chain lead times. Like there are all these different terms.
Yeah, exactly.
So what was the thing? Was it just painful mistake after another, or was there a moment where you went, aha?
It was a moment where I think it was about the time that I started to realize that Mr. Anami could speak English. And now he started asking me questions directly instead of through the interpreter.
Right.
I could hear it from him. And he finally just looked at me and said something to the effect of, I don't care how long it takes your equipment to do anything. That's not the question I'm asking you. I'm asking you, what is your demand rate?
Mm-hmm.
How many parts are on order to you right now? And if you divided that out for the month, how much time per do you have to actually make it?
Right.
And then when I thought about that for a second, I said, well, geez, that would be a good way of figuring out if I could keep up or not. And that light bulb came on. He's like, aha, now you've got it. And that was really the awakening.
That's interesting. And so in one of the earlier comments you made about what I'd call ConWhip, or priming the cell, or wetting the line, there's a lot of different terms people use for it.
Terms for that, yes.
when did you, because I find that people struggle to realize that they have to have some modicum of ConWhip
Right.
in the right places to be able to even adjust to the changes, never mind, or just get through them, never mind adjust to them.
Yeah. Well, and you and I both have one trait that's in common. We're both a little OCD. We'd like to see things a certain way anyway, right?
Yeah.
And for anybody else that's in a management role that's like that too, they think that done means done. At the end of the day, my line is clear, everybody has a clean slate, and everyone can, hey, what a good job we did today. And
Right.
it was good. But that sets you up for failure tomorrow. And it does in two ways. Also, it actually sets you up for failure today because there was work that could have been done that didn't happen because you were draining the line.
That's right.
Draining the pipeline. So,
and then you've got to build that pressure back up again.
Exactly. Right. And so, and that's really usually the conversation that happens is, well, if you want to gain additional capacity every single day, just continue to have everybody work at, up to near the end of the day until that point in time where everybody has a finished product on their outbox. And that way everybody has something clean to come in on their next incoming box to start their next operation. And if there was a spike between yesterday and today, and I know that I need to recalibrate my line, I need to rework how many people I have in my line, I'm able to very quickly say, okay, here's my new tack time. And how do I rearrange my, how much work content each person can do? Because each person might be running, 3 workstations or 4 workstations or 5 workstations, right? Now that same person might only be doing 2 workstations while his neighbor or her neighbor is doing 3 workstations, because that's how the work balance ends up being.
And it takes a good amount of practice for that to happen.
It takes practice, and it also means that your initial planning, with understanding your peak tack time, what you're expecting your peak to be, that's what you use for your division point of breaking down your how much work content each individual person should be able to do.
Right.
So then you just give more workstations to work instead of trying to rearrange an entire system while you're on the fly.
And then you can kind of buffer
Exactly.
supermarkets accordingly to try to level load and balance.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not here to teach cycle time and level loading and all that stuff, but how were those lessons that you learned during those like formative years?
Mm-hmm.
What are the ones that you carry forward the most, or hold them as most important?
So
because this is the technical part of lean.
Yeah, right. And the technical part is the technical part, and there's all kinds of people who can go out and do the technical part, and that's great. And to me, that's where people confuse what it is that we do with the fact that, hey, there are tools. Lean means that you use these tools. You use a work combination table. You do a spaghetti diagram. You do 5S.
Maybe.
Right? Exactly. All of those things are supposed to be about solving problems. And so it's much more important that you do a couple.
But solving problems of what? The system?
Yeah, they're all systematic problems, but they're also learning problems, right? It's much more important to be able to get your folks who come into work every single day to be asking themselves, what kind of cool things am I learning today? More than it is, how many widgets am I getting out today?
Okay, so is that one of the things that you learned?
Absolutely. It was really all about harvesting ideas out of people, making sure that they understood that those were really good ideas and utilizing them, and helping them get those ideas to fruition. So we became more of a facilitator of really, really good ideas than we did of thank you for that great idea. Now you just sit back and wait while somebody smarter than you figures out how to put it in place.
Right. And you and of course, I've learned a lot from you over the years, from the very beginning of my lean journey, pretty much. I started a little bit with Bruce Hamilton and then accelerated, of course, long-term with you. But what do you, in training trainers, what are the things that you used from the Toyota experience, let's say, to today with training trainers?
Uh, Nobody can train, the people who are being trained can't do it just from a book or from a video or from, they've got to live it. Think about well, I'll use myself. I'm not going to pick on anybody else. Without having the BAMA experience of being involved with so many other product lines that were going into the Camry. We went into a factory that made brakes. We went into a factory that made alloy wheels. We went into a factory that made nothing but the tubing systems that went underneath the cars, the brake lines, fuel lines, all those kinds of things. Just so many different companies. And we all had the same problems that just applied differently.
Right, right.
And so it was all about saying to ourselves, if we are going to create flow, which is always what we were trying to do, what are we going to do differently in this place than we had to do in our own place or the last place or whatever? Because they were all different. It was the same problem. It just presented itself different.
Right. And the Lean Enterprise Institute, of course, says is a situational approach to transformation. I agree with that.
Right.
You know, how many times have we been in different environments and, you know, sort of, you know, understood that we were on the right path?
Mm-hmm.
And I think working inside of the NIST MEP program for as many years as we did exposed us to another high volume of, you know, during my formidable years and learning, and I'm still learning more and more every day, but on the street with a lot of clients doing a lot of this work, you know what doesn't work fast.
Right. And I will give the MEP system their credit in the fact that they gave us a tremendous amount of clients to go and show people how this really does work.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It was broad exposure. It was great, deep exposure.
And the fact that we essentially never failed. You know, whenever we got involved with any of those clients, no matter how big or how small, we came out with a win, and those clients came out healthier.
Yeah. You know, there's always an instance of a politicking issue here or there, but in general, I would say I agree 100% because giving up having to know this and try to make them learn that, but more essentially making them efficient wasn't what we were supposed to be doing. It's making an effective system first, right?
And I don't really measure our success based upon how many extra dollars or how much more product any of those clients got out. I look back at, I remember faces. There are certain faces that come out as these were people who became rock stars.
Yeah.
In many cases, they were in trouble. Their jobs were on the line, and that's why they were given to us to do the work with, because they were the ones who were available, not the guys that were good. You know, those were, okay, we got to do this program. Here's our available person. Let's run this task here. Go work with John and Dennis. And then by the time we were done, those folks, a lot of those folks got promotions. They boosted their careers. A few of them, a whole department went out and bought new Harleys.
That's right.
Yeah, you know, it's crazy things happened with a lot of those folks. And
Deservingly so, those people earned it.
They all earned it.
Right.
And to me, the one biggest lesson that I learned from Mr. Anami and also working with the Bluegrass Automotive Manufacturers Association was that part of passing on the lessons, the learning.
Yeah.
The learning was way more important than any one of those businesses.
You know, that's the ultimate story of treating people with dignity and respect, isn't it?
It sure is. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, John, I think we're just about out of time for today. I really appreciate you sharing more about your history. I heard a few things today I hadn't heard, so it was great to hear you summarize it in such a way. I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had to learn from you, and I'm looking forward to more to come.
Yeah, me too. This is a fun journey, and it's a pivot point for us. So let's just keep on marching and doing good work.
Yeah, and then a couple podcast updates before we close out. You know, John and I are crawl, walk, run guys. Our pilot was in the fall to crawl a little bit and figure out, you know, what podcasts are. We're going into our walk phase where we're hopefully our technology is better and you've got a picture of us that's clear and the audio is clearer. I've got my new lighting. It's still not perfect yet. But when we're running with this podcast, we really want to create an environment where people can share how to become more successful by collaborating together. I think is that a fair statement, John?
Collaboration is one of our favorite words.
All right. So we value the wisdom of flying geese. We need more geese. In this walk phase, we're going to brand it a little bit different. We're going to market it a little bit different. We're going to start to experiment a little bit more than just successfully getting a recording. And we're absolutely going to be following through with an episode about the Northeast Lean Conference. Could I ask you to close out with a comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Late last fall, I guess, I attended the Northeast Lean Conference, and it was a wonderful gathering of a lot of good people with a lot of good stories to tell. And so we were able to capture some good stories from some people who, and from many different walks of life. You know, people who have had very good success from Toyota. They're essentially the root of all things lean. But also, we met with some folks who are very, very new, right out of college, that have some new ideas of ways that they can apply technology, and that was kind of fun. And then we also talked to some folks that that wanted to showcase some of their product knowledge and some software and some other things that will help guys like Dennis and I and other lean practitioners to really do a good job with this. And so I'd like to really pull out some highlights from those discussions and see what you all as listeners think about what we learned there.
That's great. Thank you so much. I know that Bruce is coming up with methods to change this year's event accordingly, and we'll stay tuned for that. So John, as always, this is Uncle D with Johnny Hustle signing off for Two Lean Guys podcast. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.
Be safe, everybody.